In this lecture, we take up the issue of negotiable instruments. Negotiable instruments, as we will learn, are essential to modern-day finance, commercial transactions. Now, what is a negotiable instrument? It's a particular type of contract, and it's a contract that features an unconditional promise to pay. Now, a negotiable instrument, to be negotiable, must be signed and it must be in writing, and it must contain that unconditional promise to pay. Now, negotiable instruments are remarkable by the fact that they are transferred not just by assignment, but through a process called negotiation. And what happens in a negotiation is that one party may be able to transfer more rights in a document than that party actually has itself, meaning they will give to a third-party purchaser more rights in the paper than the actual previous holder of the paper. Now, commercial transactions today, as we'll see, would be impossible without the use of negotiable instruments. So in this lecture, we're going to examine negotiable instruments and the role that they play in finance. And after this lecture, you should be able to answer the following questions. Why is there a need for negotiable instruments? What are the types of negotiable instruments recognized by the UCC? And what's the difference between a demand instrument and a time instrument? Now, negotiable instruments play a key role in commercial finance. And negotiable instruments really do two things. They serve two functions. First, a negotiable instrument can be a substitute for cash. Rather than paying cash, a person can draft a negotiable instrument and use that as a substitute for cash. The other type of negotiable instruments, the other way it can be used, is for the extension of credit. In order to obtain credit from a lending institution, I give to that lending institution an unconditional promise to pay for the cash that they are giving me now. So I promise to pay them back. A negotiable instrument has to be easily transferable. It has to work like cash in the same way that you can take your $20 bill and exchange it for $20 worth of goods or services, and whoever winds up with that $20 bill can then do the exact same thing. That's what we're looking for in a negotiable instrument. Furthermore, we want the negotiable instrument to retain its power, and we do so by making it easier to collect on the unconditional promise to pay found in the negotiable instrument. Sometimes the holder of a note, and that's what a negotiable instrument is often characterized as, a promissory note, a note containing a promise to pay, sometimes the holder of the note can actually transfer more rights than he has himself. Now, the law governing negotiable instruments grew out of commercial necessity. In medieval times, it was difficult to conduct business using gold or coins. And in the beginnings of the global world of trade, starting 15th, 16th century, as trade was expanding beyond the neighbor over the hill into the country around the world, the merchants discovered that it was difficult to conduct business using real gold or coins, metal goods. So merchants then created documents that were called bills of exchange to conduct their business, meaning a merchant would create a document that says the holder of this bill of exchange is entitled to withdraw from my bank in Milan, Italy, a certain amount of gold, and then the holder of that bill of exchange could then take it to their bank and take that money out. Now, the law mostly stayed out of bills of exchange. In fact, merchants developed their own rules to govern bills of exchange, to govern how they would be collected, what were the requirements of a bill of exchange. This was all part of what we previously referred to as the lex mercatoria, the law of merchants. Now, Articles 3 and 4 of the UCC together govern commercial paper, and commercial paper is simply another name for negotiable instruments. Article 3 and 4 govern negotiable instruments. Article 3 governs the creation and transfer of negotiable instruments, while Article 4 covers bank deposits and collections. We're going to be spending most of our time regarding Article 3, but we will note two roles that banks play in commercial transactions. Now, to make an instrument negotiable, it must meet certain requirements. A negotiable instrument must be a written instrument. It must be a writing. No such thing as an oral negotiable instrument. If you see that on your test, you know that's incorrect. It must be signed by the maker of the instrument. Be signed. It must contain an unconditional promise or order to pay a certain amount, a fixed amount of money, and that payment must be made either on demand or at a precise future time. And finally, the instrument must be made payable to a specific person or to order, and we'll talk about what it means to pay to order, or to the instrument's bearer, whoever holds the instrument. So these are the requirements, the 6 requirements of a negotiable instrument. A signed writing containing an unconditional promise to pay a fixed amount of money, payable on demand or an exact future time to a specific person or to order or to the instrument's bearer. Negotiable instruments can be classified in different ways. Now there's 2 main types of negotiable instruments, and that is an order to pay, and orders to pay are essentially checks. If you recall ever looking at a check, you'll note that it starts with a magic phrase, pay to the order of. It's an order to pay. It's an order to the bank to pay the party named in the instrument. The other type is a promissory note, a promise to pay. Promissory notes and CDs, in which a party promises to pay a certain amount of money at a specific time in the future. Negotiable instruments can be classified in other ways as well. A demand instrument is one that is payable on demand, and this essentially means it's payable immediately after it is issued. An issue is the first delivery of the instrument by the maker for the purpose of giving rights on the instrument to any person. The other type of instrument, or the other type of category, is a time instrument. And a time instrument is payable at a future date. Let's talk about orders to pay first. Orders to pay may be either drafts or checks. And a draft is an order to pay. It's an unconditional written order by which the party creating the draft orders another party to pay money to a third party. So a draft, an order to pay, involves 3 parties. The drawer is the person who makes the order to pay. The person writing the check, for instance. A drawee is the person to whom the order to pay is made. In a check, that would be the bank. The bank is being told to pay to the payee the amount of payment that has been ordered. So a drawer, a drawee, and the payee are the 3 parties involved in a draft. Now there's 2 different types of drafts. The first is called a sight draft. And a sight draft is simply an ability to demand payment on site. A site draft is payable when it is presented. A time draft is payable at a definite future time, sometime in the future. An acceptance is a type of draft in which the seller of the goods is both the drawer and the payee, and the buyer to whom credit is extended is the drawee. Essentially, the draft orders the buyer to pay a specified amount to the seller, usually at a stated time in the future. Now, check is the most common form of draft negotiable instrument. And if you've seen checks, written checks, experience checks, then you have familiarity with the draft form of negotiable instrument. Now, a check is a demand instrument, meaning it is payable on demand. And when there is a check, it is the bank that is ordinarily going to be the drawee. But in the case of a cashier's check, a bank is the drawer as well as the drawee. A bank acts as the drawer of a cashier's check. A certified check, another check you may have heard of, requires certification from a bank that the account has enough funds in it to cover the amount of the draft. So those are demand instruments, those are drafts. The other type of negotiable instrument we wanted to talk about were promises to pay. And promises to pay are called promissory notes. And the reason why is that a promissory note is a promise made by one party to pay money to another party. A promissory note can be made payable either at a future time, and that's the most common, or on demand. A maker is the person who promises to pay, and the payee is the person to whom the promise is made. Promissory notes sometimes can carry the name of the transaction that is involved. A collateral note references the property pledged as collateral. It's a promissory note in which collateral is being put up in exchange for the extension of credit, and the note will actually make reference to the collateral. An installment note is another type of promissory note. It's a note that's payable in installments, much like when you buy a car, you borrow money to buy a car, you pay the bank back in installments. A CD, a certificate of deposit, which you may have heard of as well, is another type of promise to pay. A CD is actually a note made by a bank in which they acknowledge a deposit of funds made payable to the holder of the note. So when we buy a CD from a bank, what the bank is really doing is giving to us a promissory note, a promise to pay. Now, under the UCC, a CD is treated as a note. The bank is the maker of the note, and the depositor is the payee. So even though the depositor is leaving money with the bank is then executing a note that says it will pay to the depositor the amount that was deposited plus an interest amount on top of that. So in conclusion, what did we learn today? Negotiable instruments play a key role in commercial finance. They can be classified in different ways. There are two types of orders to pay, and there are two types of promises to pay. And that's it. Thanks for listening.